Ruth and Max. And thank you, Charity, for just stirring meditation. I'm going to do a reading here and then give a little talk. Well, it's not a little talk, it's 5 pages. And I usually don't write anything out, so well, it's fitting in a way, following Charity's meditation. This is from Nietzsche. Happy Easter, everybody. And Pesach, I guess it's Pesach as well. It's from the madman. From the madman. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace and cried incessantly, I seek God, I seek God. As many of those who did not believe in God were standing around just then. He provoked much laughter. Has he got lost? Asked one. Did he lose his way like a child? Asked another. Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage? Has he immigrated? Thus they yelled and laughed. The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. Whither is God? He cried. I will tell you. We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how do we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night continually closing in on us? Do we not need to light lanterns in the morning? Do we hear nothing as yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we smell nothing as yet of divine decomposition? Gods to decompose. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves? The murderers of all murderers. What was the holiest and mightiest of all that the world has not yet owned, has bled to death under our knives? Who will wipe the blood off of us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatest of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and whoever is born after us, for the sake of this deed, he will belong to a higher history than all history hitherto. Perhaps Nietzsche suffered from social media before it was social media, because everyone thinks, oh, he said God is dead. False! The madman is proclaiming it in the marketplace among people who don't believe in God. And he's saying, you and I have killed him. And the world is in a state, he's saying. Did you hear how he described the world? What is up or down anymore? This is a lament, a cry, a grief cry about the way things are in the modern world. Written just, late 1800s. There's a PS to this. It wouldn't fit on the page. I'll get to it later. There's even more. So, I want to try to talk a bit about this today. The title of my talk is Incarnation and the Death of God. So, I'll see how far I get. In some ways, it's a continuation of some of the things I was trying to say last time I gave a talk. Was that last week or 2 weeks? Was it? No. Who knows? Time is an illusion. So I brought up the question last time I spoke, whenever that was, as to whether or not I believe in God. Because I was asked to give a talk. A friend asked me to give a talk. Hey, do you believe in God for his church? And I thought, no, I don't want to do that. And I tried to say, just very briefly, that the question makes me uncomfortable. It makes me uncomfortable for a lot of reasons, but one of them being, I don't really know what we mean by beliefs. And people can say they believe something and behave differently, and there's a lot of fervor around stating beliefs. So it makes me uncomfortable. I believe the Lions are going to win the Super Bowl, and that's just false. So, but I tried to say I do believe in the desire. Like, I have a desire for God. I'm the madman here. I seek God. That I know. That's not even a belief I have. That's something I know that is present. And so, to the extent that I believe, I believe that I have a desire because I know that I have a desire. That's maybe as far as I can go. And I also tried to say that, for me at least, this desire and doubt hold hands. They're like lovers, you know. Doubt and desire, they're in a love affair for me. And they walk side by side. And because the desire for the transcendent, for things of ultimate concern, I could say, is present in me. And I think what's interesting about this time of year, especially in the Christian calendar, which has affected the entire Western world, and now the economic systems, and eggs are more expensive this week than other weeks, and things like that. But mythically, spiritually, we're asked each year to look at the death of God. I think that's kind of funny. And you might have questions about, I don't know, about Jesus and his divinity. I'm just saying, we're asked once a year to look at it. Now, a lot of times we don't. We skip Good Friday and just show up in pastel on Sundays. But it's supposed to come around in the calendar. Here it comes around again. And Pesach also has a lot of death in it as well. Passover was Easter before it got called Easter about 300 years later. So Jesus was celebrating Passover during the last week of his life, as you know. But every year it comes around again, and there's something very stark about the story. It's like, let me speak mythopoetically as much as I can today, but it's like God turns God's back on God. There's a darkness, and there's a tomb, and there's the abyss, and there's Hades, and this is all swirling in the waters, and not even God can stop the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. That's a line from Shakespeare. Not even God can stop history as history unfolds. And Jesus has to say things like, "Why have you forsaken me?" And we have to say, "Because he has." There is no, what's it called in Greek plays? Deus ex machina. The divine appearance that plucks people out of. It's just let it be as it is. It's terrible. It's a terrible story. So we end up saying, "Why have you forsaken us? And why have you left stage right?" So I'm just saying, isn't Easter the time where we hold to the question of the death of God right in front of us? Like every year we hold it out in front of us. And this made me uncomfortable. Like, I don't know how many of you have a church background, but many of us do, and all around the world today, and I'm really not mocking this, I promise you, people will gather and they'll say something like this: "He is risen," and the people will say, "He is risen indeed." And I remember hearing that and just feeling uncomfortable. Like, I don't know why I felt uncomfortable. Like, "He is risen." I guess it's the sentiment with it. Like, I don't know, it made me slightly uncomfortable. And I mentioned in last week's talk, whenever that was, because time is an illusion, that the very end of the book of Matthew has the ascension. And it says, "Many believed and some doubted." And I thought, what a way to end a book. It's like, "He is risen," and some people are like, "Not so sure." that's actually tells you something. There's something very powerful about the Gospels. I know the writers have their individual agendas, but they're also just letting some things be as they are. Do you know the oldest copy of the book of Mark doesn't have the resurrection in it? So you then ask, who added it? And then you're into all this scholarly stuff, which we won't talk about today. So even if today you believe that Jesus resurrected, I might even wonder, okay, so what? So what? Then what? Well, then he's around for a while, and then he leaves again. So like, thanks. See ya. That's the story, really. 40 days later, there's the ascension, and there's an emptiness again. And so what is here? And one of the things that, I also have mixed feelings about religion, which is one of the things I want to talk about today. But sometimes religion at its worst feels a little like nostalgia. Like we look back and like we have warm feelings. And I'm not against warm feelings. I'd rather have them. But sometimes I don't. And like even Christmas comes around, I'm like, it's nice. We get to open little presents, and little baby Jesus is in his little sweet little crib and all that stuff. And it's nostalgic, and that's not nothing. But it's also kind of thin, the nostalgia. It's like that. Remember that skit from Chris Farley and when it was like a talk show host? Anyway, Chris Farley is a talk show host, and it's on SNL, and he has Paul McCartney on one day, and he's like, hey, remember that time when you were in the Beatles? He's like, that was awesome. That's all he ever says about everything that was awesome. It's like that feeling like it was so awesome when you were in the Beatles. So is that what we're doing on Easter? Like that was so awesome when that thing that happened that we never saw. We're just remembering it. It's more than that, of course, because of the thread that was in that song, really, and even a thread that was in Charity's talk, that like we have a desire for things to turn over again, And Easter, of course, happens in the spring. It's part of the earth cycle. It's why I wanted to call Incarnation in the death of God, because there's a fleshiness to things. And okay, so I have two questions I want to ask right now. One has to do with Christianity in the broadest sense, or we could even say Christendom. I might even go further and say the Christ symbol. And here's a question I think we're wrestling with in the 21st century, consciously and unconsciously, which is, are we entering an era where it's waning? Is the Christ image losing its power? That's a question I really am carrying. And part of the reason why I'm carrying that question, I got that from Jung, because Jung said that even great symbols, sometimes they wane. He actually says they go underground, they might reappear later, but they fade. They fade in their power to transform. And how do we know that? Well, because sometimes, Jesus especially, we know Jesus is waning a bit in his power to transform because he's just co-opted by every single group, He's just a guy in a bathrobe and long hair and the American flag at this point. That doesn't have anything to do with the historical Jesus or the Jesus of the Gospels or even the Jesus of the Christ of Christianity. It's like he's our buddy who plays baseball and, votes whatever way you vote. He's a flip-flopper, because he's a projection screen at this point. We used to sing this song when I was a worship leader way back in the old days called "The Blood Will Never Lose Its Power." Also, another song that made me uncomfortable because I remember feeling it kind of feels like it's losing its power, and we're just going to keep singing this, like it will never lose its power. Will never lose its power. It's losing its power, and I don't celebrate that really. I really don't, and neither does Nietzsche. Not in this passage. He's lamenting, we have killed God. We have killed the sacred. And there's not enough blood. There's not enough water in the world to wash our hands of this blood, is what he's saying. What a state we're in. We don't know what is up or down anymore. So that's a question I'm not going to answer. I'm just wondering, the big symbol and Christianity more broadly, is it going, because religions go through cycles too. Maybe we're going into the tomb. Is what I'm saying. Maybe it's going into the tomb. I put that in my last book. I said maybe we're 3 days in the tomb. We haven't gotten around to Sunday yet. And I'm just wondering. I don't know. I think that's the case. And so it takes a madman to run through the streets shouting things like this. I guess I'm the madman today. God is dead. You have killed him. I have killed him. We're in the tomb. And weeping is in order. That's what happens. Weeping is in order. Lament is in order. Sackcloth and ashes are in order. So again, I don't really celebrate the state of global Christianity because the vacuum that it leaves is kind of terrible. And the religious impulse, this is where part of what makes it terrible, the religious impulse never goes away. I think it's an instinct. Okay? It never goes away, and so it's going to find its course. And the low-hanging fruit is fundamentalism of any variety. Give me an ideology and a certainty, and I'll cling to that. Because big religions, they actually can contain quite a bit of ambiguity. They really can. Judaism, tremendous ambiguity. Christianity at its best, tremendous ambiguity. It can contain it because it's old, and and just by sheer age, the container tends to hold more. But religious ideology is new and the clinging is intense and that's what's happening. That, like ideological fundamentalism or nihilism, kind of are the options. Like nothing then. So some despair, I think, is in order. My belief, I'll give you a belief I have now, is that we're losing our taste for the sacred, and that makes us more thirsty. Or we're losing our hunger for it, and we're growing in hunger sort of at the same time, and our teeth are on edge. That's a line from the Bible. The fathers have eaten sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge. My teeth are on edge. It's like the gnashing of teeth, and we're upset, and where is the sacred gone? And that's the madman in Nietzsche's parable here. And we're not tasting much of the sacred inside our rituals a lot of the time, We're supposed to taste the sacred in the Eucharist, but it's just not as tasty as going to the bar. So people just go to the bar. And that's just the way it is right now. And part of my own personal calling, and I don't know why, I don't even feel like I chose this. I didn't wake up and say, what shall I do with my life? I'm going to do this. To speak on behalf of the sacred ways, of the ancient ways. I don't even know exactly what I mean by that. But to say, sort of like the madman, that the sacred is still everywhere, though it doesn't feel like it's everywhere. The flow of the sort of primordial underground chambers are still hidden and can still be tasted. That's just something I feel is like pulled toward. And where am I going to do that? Well, in the midst of our culture, in the madness of our culture that's depressed and numb and suspicious and narcissistic and distracted and stuck. There, in the marketplace. I don't care if people sneer at me when I say the sacred is just under the surface of all things. So what? I'll look like a madman. That's okay. Here's the second question. That's question number one is Christianity or even the Christ symbol waning a bit? Or is it going into the tomb? That's a better question. Here's the second question, and it has to do with incarnation. I have an intuition that most spiritualities and religions that I know of, especially Christianity at its best, has a belief that whatever we mean by the divine is ultimately found in the ordinary. And you think it's going to be the opposite, like the divine is going to be somewhere else. He's going to be behind the curtain, The Wizard of Oz is actually a great example. Like, that's it. It's just, it's sort of like that. It's like, it's ordinary. And I still trust that. That's what I trust. I think that's Christianity's best gift, is to insist that whatever we mean by the divine is infleshed. It's everywhere. It's Christianity likes to locate it in one person, Jesus, but that's not even what Jesus says. It's like it's there as an image to discover it elsewhere in the Son, in that Son, and in the moon and in the clouds and in the streams and in other human beings. And there's something of the sacred there, if you like that word better. And in the winter lightning, that's a line from T.S. Eliot, in the rose. It's as if the death of God leaves us hungry for God. That's what I find so interesting. Yes, God is dead. I agree with the parable. And we get hungrier for the transcendent, for the sacred, for meaning. And I say, let's follow the craving. Let's follow the hunger. And where else do we taste these things other than in the everyday? You know, how many of you really, 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 really like the first taste of a cup of coffee in the morning? See, what's the difference between that and the Eucharist? I don't know. Not that much. It's a matter of posture and intention and maybe even prayer. And when I say God here, you can translate that into things of ultimate concern if you want. So it's like Jesus has to disappear to sort of reappear in the everyday, something like that. At least that's where I think the hunger takes us. Okay, so do I think Jesus actually got out of the tomb? I'll just quote my archaeology professor. I don't know, I wasn't there. So, do I think the disciples experienced something real? Actually, I do. I actually kind of trust that. And I can trust that from my own experience. I'll tell you something weird. After my dad died, about a month later, I had a dream. And I'm not going to tell you the dream because I'm not afraid of getting emotional in public. Well, I'm a little afraid of it. But it will make me emotional. So I won't tell you the exact content. But now I'm into dream work. I've been studying dream work for a long time. I work with my dreams with an analyst. So often I'll think about images or characters in dreams being manifestations of the psyche, of the personal psyche, sometimes the collective psyche. I tend not to think, literally, my dad is visiting me, but this was a different dream. And I think, part of me says, yeah, that's exactly what was happening. There was a visitation. And there was an encounter. And he needed to tell me something, and I needed to tell him something in the dream. And I had one other experience like that. I was meditating, and I'm not a meditator. I know that sounds like I'm sounding spiritual. I'm really sucky at meditation, and I don't really do it. But one time I was doing it, and I was supposed to do it. I was doing it the right way, where I was letting go of all thoughts. And all of a sudden, I felt my dad's hand on my shoulder. And I would say, that is as real as the birth of my first child. It happened. So why am I mentioning that? Because I think something happened to the disciples. They experienced the resurrected Christ. Now, I don't know how. I don't know why. Even people are like, it was a literal resurrection. Are like, wait a minute, but he also walks through walls and eats fish. And it's weird. It's weird. It's like, yeah, okay, so something took place. And by the way, in Buddhism, they have this notion that 40 days following a death before they eventually go into the place of the dead, there's a liminal realm where there are visitations that take place. Like you can still talk with the dead because they haven't fully surrendered to their death. 40 days, that's all you get. And in Christianity, by the way, you have accidentally the same number because you have the resurrection of Jesus and then 40 days later you have the ascension. That's that liminal time. It's the same in Buddhism. Start paying attention to the 40 days after someone dies and what's in that space? Are they really gone? Are they there? You know what I'm saying? Anyway. So my point is I experienced something. It was a matter of belief. I don't know what I believe about the afterlife. I just experienced this weird thing. And I'm saying probably something like that happened around the resurrection. I don't know. Jung has that great line. He's asked by the BBC if he believes in God. He says, I don't believe in God, I know. Which is such an infuriating response. But that's what I think is much more important. What do you know? What do you know? What's your own experience like? What's the nature of your own experience? What do you know? Not a matter of your stated beliefs so much. I want to read you something. And I'll see how much time I have. I'm working on a new book, and so here's an excerpt from my new book. And because something strange started happening to me. This is basically like a part 2 of my last book. But in my last book, this is how it begins. well, this is somewhere in the middle. It doesn't matter. My last book, Bitten by a Camel, was about my departure from evangelical Christianity. It was about the very beginning of this descent. It's a book about the unraveling of what I called faith and the subtle seeds that were planted in the wake of this upheaval. I had to work through as best I could certain ideas that plagued me about my tradition and certain personal experiences, particularly the wreckage of moving to Israel for graduate school and coming back and trying to make my life and my Christianity work. It's the story of my first existential face-off, which started just before I turned 30, one that I lost, and which took 10 years to unfold. The external search for the right God or the right religion, the right kind of prayer, the right way to do church, the right beliefs, the right community, the right bookshelf, left me without finding what I thought I was looking for. In this rather empty space, something decided I was ready enough for another journey, one I knew nothing about. I really thought my spiritual odyssey was full, that I'd been through the ringer. I'd moved to Jerusalem, after all, in search for the truth, was bitten by a camel, literally and symbolically, came home to wrestle with questions of my vocation, left the pastoral role that paid my bills, had all my ideas about faith dismantled, if they were even my ideas. I even had a few hints and guesses in this wreckage for how change and growth happens, a few ideas around the gifts of losing one's faith, as if I'd come out the other side with a few life lessons and it was time to give a TED Talk. But as soon as I finished the book, or more accurately, stopped writing, I'd already walked off a cliff I didn't see coming. As I was writing, in fact, something strange and unexpected happened. In the midst of all the confusion, I started having some of the most profound spiritual experiences of my life. You could even say that I was experiencing a religious life. Now that I was not carrying the mantle of evangelical megachurch pastor or professing belief in this or that, or even worrying if I fit into some group, Christian or not. During my own version of this drowning, something very subtle and very surprising started happening, something I didn't like nor wanted to admit at the time. As soon as I started getting honest about my own experience, as soon as mystery kept altering my course and kneecapping my plans, as soon as dreams and visions started working on who I thought I was in the world, as soon as I was undone just a little more, as soon as I thought, I'll never set foot in a church again, as soon as grief had its way with me, as soon as I really started feeling my own rage and longing and loss and desire, then the very images of my own tradition started ringing true. Not true as objectively verifiable facts, or literally true in the way evangelicalism insisted, or theologically true like doctrine statements, but somehow truer than all that, experienced rather than believed. For example, it doesn't say for example, but high in the Navajo sandstone dunes of Capitol Reef in Utah, after a couple of days of fasting alone, I saw the outline of a stone whale on the trackless path that I took to get water from hidden desert pools. No doubt this was a whale, a great fish coming out of a 5-million-year-old rock. My heart pounded. I crawled into the mouth of this beast without any thought, as if it was a natural part of anyone's day. I allowed myself to be swallowed, as if I could really fight it in the first place. It was too late. I closed my eyes, feeling enveloped in the darkness of this being. It felt as if I was decomposing now, having no sense of how long I'd been here or would be here, no idea for when this would end or how it would end or whether in my demise or something else. When I crawled out, knowing I also needed some drinking water, I was shaken. I took to speaking to this whale whenever I caught a glimpse of this creature and entering this whale on my daily water commute. I don't know. I thought, we had an agreement. I'll offer myself to you. In exchange, well, I don't know. No sign will be given to you except the sign of Jonah. I had no choice in entering this archetypal image. It came out of the desert of silence, out of the wilderness of my own drowning, and out of the physical and very real world. I'm going to skip a section here. My ego had no say in the images and phrases and voices and dreams and stories that flooded me on my archetypal and literal fast, In fact, what was I even doing out here, I wondered aloud. How did I end up in this place, really? I had followed Jesus out to the wilderness in a way I had never followed him in the past. It was like I accidentally followed him by confessing I was no longer his follower, which may be closer to the thing Jesus had in mind in the first place. If I'm embarrassingly honest, I thought transformation was generally a journey from right to left, from evangelical to progressive evangelical to humanist to spiritual manifester or something like that. I was wrong. The experiences I was having were so unexpected that I did not think they were even religious or spiritual. I wasn't looking for them, making them happen, trying to be spiritual, joining some new religion, practicing some discipline, quite the opposite. All I knew was that I felt a deep unknowing, like floating out to sea, and then a storm arrived. By a religious life, I mean something specific. I've come to think of a religious life as one informed and shaped by the mystery of existence, a life dedicated to pursuing and surrendering to this mystery, a life bent on finding or recovering meaning, a life shaped by nature and wind, a life with one ear on the wisdom of the past and one eye on the possibility of the future. A life that's open to the Spirit, to dreams and visions, to repentance and heartbreak, to being worked by grief, to a life which argues with the divine, wrestles with angels at night, faces the tempter in the wilderness of the heart, and is subjected to the great symbols and archetypes hidden beneath the world our ego thinks it understands. This is a life informed by whatever the mystery is bringing forth now in our dreams and in our visions and our waking and ordinary lives. As if our lives are a poetic act spoken by God into the world, as if it was the first day of creation, because it is. These are the ancient ways, otherwise known as a religious life, before anyone ever used the word religion. So maybe that's enough of a little excerpt. I told you it was going to be a long talk. So I guess I feel like the madman. I seek God, I seek God, I seek God. We have killed him, you and I. So let me end just with how Nietzsche ends this. I never know how to say Nietzsche. I don't know if you ever saw Little Miss Sunshine. Great movie. Definitely should watch it. There's a really broody teenage kid in there, and they're like, "What have you been reading?" He says, "Nietzsche." So every time I think of Nietzsche, I think of Nietzsche. It's the best. I'm just going to read this, and this will be the end here. Here the madman fell silent and looked again at his listeners. And they too were silent and stared at him in astonishment. Maybe you need 100 years of silence when it comes to the question of God. I'm saying that. That's not At last, he threw his lantern on the ground, and it broke to pieces and went out. "I have come too early," he said to them. "My time is not yet." This tremendous event is still on its way, still wandering. It has not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars requires time. Deeds, though done, still require time to be seen and heard. This deed is still more distant from them than the most distant stars, and yet they have done it to themselves. It has been related further that on that same day, the madman forced his way into several churches, and there struck up his Requiem Aeternam Deo. Let out and called to account. He said always to have replied nothing but, "What after all these churches now, if they are not the tombs and the sepulchres of God?" Thanks for listening.